The lanterns along the Hale plantation cast long, trembling shadows across the veranda, their flames struggling against the damp Charleston night. Heat clung to the air like a second skin, thick and unmoving. But Eleanor Briggs walked through it with an unsettling stillness. Others hurried, others sweated, others whispered. Eleanor simply existed, silent, composed, as if the world around her bent to her rhythm. That was what unsettled people most. The servants had 100 stories about her. Some said she was born during a thunderstorm that split an oak tree in two. Others swore she answered questions never asked aloud. But the white families of Charleston feared her for a different reason. She listened. She noticed. She remembered. And remembering was dangerous on southern soil. Tonight the plantation buzzed with preparation. Master Jonathan Hale had returned from Philadelphia after nearly a year away, and the main house brimmed with the sharp scent of polished wood and the distant hum of suppressed expectations. He was the heir, the golden son, the man Charleston assumed would follow his father's proud legacy. But Jonathan stepped inside the house as if reluctant to enter his own life again. The first thing he noticed was the absence of his mother's scent, lavender water that once floated through these halls. The second was the presence of Eleanor, standing at the far end of the corridor, her posture straight, her eyes lowered but listening with unnerving precision. Jonathan paused. For a moment, something like recognition, or was it discomfort, flashed across his face. "I remember you," he said softly. Eleanor kept her gaze on the floor. "Yes, sir. You've grown," he continued, though the words felt foolish the instant they left him. She hadn't grown. She had sharpened. The girl he vaguely recalled had turned into a young woman with a quiet gravity that seemed out of place in a household that preferred its servants unseen. Jonathan tried to step past her, but something in the stillness of the hall made him look again. "Everything has changed here," he murmured. Eleanor lifted her eyes. "Just enough." "Some things haven't, sir." The answer was too bold, too direct. Jonathan felt heat rise to his neck, unsure if it came from the summer air or her words. Before he could reply, the sound of boots echoed behind him. "Jonathan!" boomed Edward Hale, his father, sweeping in with the confidence of a man accustomed to controlling every room he entered. "You made better time than expected." Jonathan forced a smile. The roads were clear. Edward turned to Eleanor without warmth. "Fetch the decanters for the dining room, and mind yourself." "Yes, Master Hale." She moved without a single wasted motion. Jonathan watched her walk away, noticing, not for the first time, that others stepped aside before she even reached them. During dinner, Charleston's elite filled the hall with laughter sharp enough to cut through bone. Gossip hung in the air like humidity. Jonathan sat among men who spoke of land, crops, debts, and politics, all with the certainty of those who believed their world unshakable. But beneath the polished table and silverware, something was off. At one point, as Eleanor served wine, a guest slurred drunkenly, "Is that the girl? The one your wife favored?" An icy hush swept the table. Edward's jaw clenched. "My late wife had peculiar attachments," he answered coldly. "The girl knows her place now." Eleanor said nothing, but Jonathan saw it, just a flicker, an emotion crossing her face so quickly he questioned whether he'd imagined it. Pain? Anger? Something older? Later, as the evening wound down, Jonathan lingered near the doorway, unsettled by the whispered comments he'd heard all night. He found Eleanor in the hallway, carefully extinguishing candles. "Tell me something," he said quietly. What did he mean? About my mother? Eleanor's hands froze around the brass snuffer. She didn't turn. "Your mother trusted people she shouldn't have," she whispered. "And she feared people she should have." Jonathan felt the room tighten around him. "What are you implying?" This time she did turn, meeting his gaze directly, fiercely. "I'm not implying anything, sir. I'm remembering." Jonathan's breath caught, though he could not explain why. Before he could press her further, a sharp crack echoed from the old east wing, wood splintering, something collapsing. Eleanor's expression changed instantly. Not fear, not surprise. Recognition. She whispered, "It's starting again." And Jonathan felt, for the first time since he'd returned, that something in this house had been waiting for him, something no one had warned him about. The dawn crept slowly over the Hale plantation, spilling pale gold through the warped glass windows of the east wing. Jonathan stood before the collapsed beams and splintered floorboards, the scent of old dust and damp wood clinging to the air like a memory refusing to fade. Servants gathered at a distance, muttering prayers under their breath. No one dared step closer, except Eleanor. She approached with that same unnerving calm, her steps precise, her eyes scanning the wreckage as though searching for something only she understood. Jonathan glanced at her, the unease from the night before still tightening inside his chest. "It wasn't the storm," he said, though there had been none. "And it wasn't age. This damage is fresh." Eleanor kept her gaze on the broken boards. "Old things fall," she murmured, "especially when they want to be found." Jonathan frowned. "Wood doesn't want." "No, sir," she said softly, "but secrets do." He stared at her, baffled by her certainty. She knelt beside a cracked beam, brushing away dust until a faint, dark stain emerged on the wood, almost black now but too irregular to be wrought. Jonathan crouched beside her. "What is that?" "Something your father told the carpenters to cover years ago," she answered, her voice barely audible. Jonathan's pulse quickened. "How do you know that?" Eleanor stood abruptly. "Because I was here." Her words hung between them, heavy and unsaid. She walked away before he could respond, leaving Jonathan with the uncomfortable realization that she had just revealed more in one sentence than anyone else on the plantation ever dared. Later that morning, the household resumed its rhythm, though tension pulsed beneath every task. Jonathan moved through the corridors of his childhood home with a growing sense of dissonance. Every portrait on the wall, every polished banister, every heavy door felt like a relic of someone else's life, a life his mother had shaped, a life his father now dominated, a life Eleanor seemed to understand better than he did. He found her again near the kitchen garden, collecting herbs with a woven basket at her hip. The air outside was thick with the scent of soil, mint, and the distant musk of the marshes. "You're avoiding me," Jonathan said. Eleanor didn't look up. "I'm working, sir." "That isn't an answer." She paused, her fingers lingering over a sprig of rosemary. "Your father doesn't like questions," she said, "especially when they come from people who remember too much." Jonathan stepped closer. "My father doesn't decide what I ask." "You think that now," she replied, turning so slowly it felt deliberate. "But he decides everything here." Jonathan's jaw tightened. "Not everything." Eleanor let the silence stretch before speaking again, her voice shaded with something darker. "The night your mother died, she asked for you." He froze. No one had ever mentioned that. Not a servant, not a doctor, not his father. Jonathan swallowed hard. "How could you know that?" "Because she didn't ask for him," Eleanor whispered. "She asked for you." Jonathan felt the world tilt, the air pressing against his lungs. "My mother and we weren't close. She would have asked for my father." Eleanor shook her head. She didn't want him near her. Jonathan staggered back a step, anger and confusion sparking inside him. "You're implying something again." "Not implying, sir," she said quietly. "Remembering." The same word she had used the night before. The same tone that made him feel like the ground beneath him was shifting. Before he could demand more, footsteps crunched along the path. Two overseers approached, their expressions wary. "Master Hale wants the girl," one of them said, jerking his chin toward Eleanor. Jonathan stiffened. "Why?" "Inspection of the east wing," the man replied. "He says she was seen near it last night." Eleanor's face remained unreadable, but Jonathan saw the slightest tightening of her jaw. "She did nothing wrong," Jonathan said sharply. "Master Hale decides that," the overseer answered. Eleanor nodded once, resigned. "I'll go." As she walked away between the two men, Jonathan felt a cold current curl down his spine. Something was wrong, deeply wrong, and his father's sudden interest in Eleanor was no coincidence. He watched her disappear into the shadowed archway of the main house. Just before the door closed behind her, she turned her head slightly. Her eyes met Jonathan's for less than a second. But in that second, he saw it. Fear. Not for herself. For him. And Jonathan realized with a clarity that unsettled every part of him that whatever truth Eleanor carried was already pulling them both into something neither one of them could escape. Something that was only just beginning to stir. The afternoon light slanted through the high windows of the Hale study, cutting the room into long stripes of gold and shadow. Dust floated lazily in the warm beams, disturbed only when Edward Hale paced across the thick carpet, his boots thudding with restrained irritation. Eleanor stood near the door, her posture straight, her gaze fixed on the floorboards. Jonathan watched from the far wall, arms crossed, trying to read both their faces. Edward circled Eleanor like a man assessing a tool for damage. "You were seen near the east wing the night it collapsed," he said, his voice steady and clipped. "Explain yourself." Eleanor didn't flinch. "I was extinguishing candles, same as every night." "That wing has been sealed for months," Edward snapped. "Yes, sir," she replied quietly, "but candles were left burning." Jonathan's eyes narrowed. "By whom?" Eleanor hesitated. It was only a blink, barely noticeable, but Jonathan caught it. "Edward, too." "I asked you a question," Edward pressed. Eleanor lowered her voice. "By your wife." The room froze. Jonathan felt the breath punch out of him. Edward took a step forward, face reddening, not in grief but in rage. "That is impossible," he hissed. "My wife has been dead for nearly 2 years." Eleanor lifted her eyes, and for a moment, the force of her gaze made Jonathan's chest tighten. "She left them burning," she said softly. "Before she—" "Enough." Edward's shout cracked through the study like a whip. "You forget your place." But Jonathan wasn't listening to his father anymore. He was staring at Eleanor, a strange, tremulous certainty growing in his mind. She wasn't speaking in riddles. She wasn't playing with metaphors. She was telling a memory. After a long, brittle silence, Edward dismissed her with a flick of his hand. "Get out." Eleanor left the room without a single backward glance. When the door closed, Jonathan rounded on his father. "What was that about? She knows something. She's terrified to speak, but she knows." Edward snorted. "She knows nothing worth repeating." "That's a lie," Jonathan said, surprising himself with the steadiness of his voice. "Mother trusted her." Edward stopped pacing. He looked at Jonathan with a coldness that belonged to a stranger. "Your mother was unwell." Jonathan felt his stomach drop. "Is that what you've been telling people?" "That is what is true," Edward replied. "She grew hysterical, delusional, attached to servants she shouldn't have been alone with." Jonathan stepped closer. "Or maybe she trusted those servants more than she trusted you." The words were out before he could stop them. Edward's face darkened. "Be careful, boy." But Jonathan didn't back down. "What happened in that wing the night she died?" Edward's jaw locked. He turned away, as if the question were beneath him. "I will not entertain fantasies." Jonathan exhaled sharply, frustration burning under his skin. "Then I'll find my own answers." Edward didn't try to stop him. That, more than anything, terrified Jonathan. The evening sun bled orange across the sky as Jonathan searched the servants' quarters. Voices mingled, pots clattered, dogs barked somewhere beyond the fields. But Eleanor's absence swallowed everything. No one wanted to tell him where she had gone. Eyes dropped, shoulders stiffened. Even the bravest servants muttered excuses and slipped away. Finally, near the old well behind the smokehouse, he found her. She was sitting on the stone rim, hands folded, the fading sunlight catching in her hair like smoldering embers. The moment she saw Jonathan, her expression tightened, not with fear, but with resignation. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "I need answers," Jonathan replied. Eleanor stared at the horizon, where the marshlands shimmered under the dying light. "Answers have a cost. I'm willing to pay it." She looked at him then. Really looked, and something inside her seemed to shift, break or surrender. "Your mother wasn't delusional," Eleanor said. "She was frightened. She confided in me because no one else would listen." Jonathan's heart pounded. What frightened her? Eleanor's fingers curled over the rough stone. Your father. The world lurched. He hurt her, she whispered. More than once. And he made sure no one ever spoke of it. Jonathan staggered back. No, you're wrong. I saw it, she said, her voice trembling. I helped her hide the bruises. I heard what he said to her when the doors were closed. Jonathan felt bile rise in his throat. Why didn't you tell me? Because she begged me not to. Because she thought knowing would destroy you. Eleanor's eyes shimmered, reflecting something far deeper than fear. And because she was right. Jonathan sank onto the stones beside her, his hands shaking. The truth wrapped around him like smoke, suffocating. Eleanor, what happened the night she died? Eleanor inhaled slowly, painfully. There was a fight, a terrible one. She ran to the east wing to hide something. Something she told me must never fall into his hands. Jonathan's pulse hammered. What was it? She looked down, her voice barely more than breath. Something that proves everything. A faint rustle echoed from the trees behind them. Too deliberate. Too close. Eleanor froze. Jonathan turned toward the shadows. Someone had been listening, and they were still there, watching. The sound came again, a soft shift of weight on fallen leaves, barely detectable, yet unmistakably human. Jonathan rose from the well's edge, every muscle in his body tightening. The trees swayed lazily in the humid breeze, their branches creaking like old bones. But the presence lurking behind them was not the wind. Who's there? Jonathan demanded. Silence answered. Eleanor stood quickly, her breath shallow. Jonathan moved in front of her instinctively, scanning the shadows as the last streaks of sunlight bled out of the sky. For a moment, nothing stirred. Then, a flash of movement, a figure slipping between the pines. Too graceful for a worker, too silent for a stranger. Eleanor's whisper sliced through the stillness. It's one of your father's men. Jonathan felt a coldness settle deep in his bones. He grabbed her hand without thinking. We're leaving, now. They moved away from the well and toward the back entrance of the kitchen house, keeping low, staying in the thinning shadows. Eleanor's steps were swift but steady. Jonathan's heart hammered loud enough he feared it could give them away. Inside the kitchen house, the heat was overwhelming. Coal ovens still warm from the day's baking, herbs hanging from the rafters, copper pots reflecting the flicker of lantern light. The smell of yeast and smoke wrapped around them like a heavy cloak. Eleanor pulled her hand free. He knows, she whispered. Your father knows what I told you. Jonathan turned to her, breath unsteady. I won't let him touch you. It isn't about me, she said. He only cares about what your mother left behind. Jonathan leaned in, lowering his voice. The thing she hid. Where is it? Eleanor hesitated, not because she doubted him, but because she feared the answer. Her fingers brushed her apron, twisting the rough linen fabric. She told me to guard it with my life, she murmured, and I have. Jonathan stepped closer. Eleanor, your life is already in danger. Her eyes softened, pain, fear, loyalty all tangled together. Jonathan, this thing she hid, it could destroy him. Then he should be destroyed, Jonathan said, surprising even himself with the venom in his voice. Before Eleanor could respond, footsteps pounded outside the kitchen house. Heavy, purposeful. Jonathan grabbed her arm again and led her through the narrow back corridor. They slipped into the pantry where the air was cooler, tinged with dried fruit and stored grain. Eleanor pressed her back against the shelves, trying to calm her breathing. Jonathan kept watch through a crack in the wooden door. Two overseers marched across the yard, lanterns swinging, voices low and urgent. Master Hale says the girl was with the boy. They're both to be brought inside. We search everything this time. No more hiding. Eleanor closed her eyes as if the words cut deeper than any blade. Jonathan turned back to her. We need to go somewhere they won't follow. There's nowhere on this land they won't, she whispered. Jonathan's gaze sharpened. Then we leave the land. Eleanor's breath hitched. The idea was unthinkable, dangerous beyond measure. But Jonathan's resolve was fierce. He took her face gently in his hands. Where is the thing my mother hid? Her eyes glistened with the weight of years of silence. Then she lifted her chin and whispered, "In the east wing, beneath the floorboards of her sewing room." Jonathan's pulse surged. The east wing collapsed. "Not completely," Eleanor said, "but the place where she hid it, that part was no accident." Jonathan frowned. "What do you mean?" Eleanor stepped closer, voice barely audible. "Your father knew exactly where to strike." The truth struck him like a blow. The collapse hadn't been a coincidence or an accident or decay. It had been deliberate. Jonathan's breath trembled. "He's looking for it too." "Yes," Eleanor whispered, "and he'll find it if we don't." The pantry door rattled violently, someone testing it from the other side. Jonathan grabbed Eleanor's hand and yanked her toward the back exit. They burst out into the dark, humid night, sprinting across the yard toward the cluster of trees that bordered the marsh. Behind them, the pantry door crashed open. Shouts erupted. Lanterns flared. Jonathan and Eleanor plunged into the tree line, swallowed by shadows thick as tar. Branches clawed at their clothes. Insects swarmed. The damp earth sucked at their shoes. But they did not stop, not even when the plantation lights faded behind them like dying stars. Finally, breaths ragged, they reached the clearing near the marsh, a place where the moonlight barely touched the ground. Jonathan turned to Eleanor. "We go to the east wing tomorrow, before dawn." Eleanor looked toward the distant silhouette of the house, a faint glow rising from the windows like an omen. "You don't understand," she whispered. "If we go back there, we won't come back the same." Jonathan stepped closer, voice steady despite the fear clawing at him. "Then tell me now. What exactly are we going to find?" Eleanor's lips parted, but no words came. Because in the darkness behind Jonathan, something moved. Something close enough to hear every secret they had just spoken. The sky was still black when Jonathan and Eleanor emerged from the marsh, their clothes damp, their skin chilled by the pre-dawn air. The Hale plantation loomed ahead, a dark silhouette against the horizon. Smoke drifted from the chimneys. Lanterns glowed faintly in the hallways. The house was awake, or watching. Jonathan tightened his grip on Eleanor's hand. "We go straight to the east wing. No one will be there yet." Eleanor nodded, though her eyes flickered with a tension he had never seen in her. "Your father rises before the sun. Then we must be faster," Jonathan said. They crossed the yard in silence, moving like shadows between the empty stables and the dew-covered hedges. Birds stirred in the trees, a reminder that the world around them still belonged to ordinary rhythms, even as theirs spun toward something irreversible. Inside the house, the corridors were dim and cool. Jonathan led Eleanor through the servants' hallway and into the narrow passage that connected to the east wing. The faint scent of mold hit them as soon as they stepped inside, the air stale, tinged with rot and old grief. The wing looked worse in the early light. Beams bent inward, plaster cracked open like bone. Sunlight seeped through the broken rafters, illuminating dust motes swirling like spirits trapped between floors. Eleanor moved first. She walked toward the far corner of the hall, toward what had once been his mother's sewing room. Jonathan followed, his chest tightening with every step. Memories drifted through the fractured walls. The soft murmur of his mother's voice, the click of her needles, the low hum of hymns she sang under her breath to drown out something only she knew. When they reached the threshold, Eleanor paused. "It's here." The floorboards were warped but intact. The sewing table was overturned, threads scattered across the floor like veins of muted color. Jonathan knelt and brushed the dust aside. "Where exactly?" Eleanor crouched beside him and placed her hand on one plank, slightly raised as though unsettled by the weight of years. "Here, beneath this." Jonathan wedged his fingers under the board and pulled. It resisted at first, then lifted with a groan of old wood. Beneath it lay a small wrapped bundle, oilcloth tied with frayed twine, stained and brittle. Jonathan's breath caught. He reached for it, but Eleanor placed her hand over his. "Before you open it," she whispered, "you must understand this will change everything." Jonathan swallowed hard. So be it. He untied the twine. Inside the cloth was a leather-bound journal. His mother's handwriting, delicate, meticulous, covered the first page. Jonathan felt the world tilt. He turned the pages slowly, each line slicing deeper. Entries detailing fear, confinement, bruises hidden beneath dresses, pleas for safety, confessions of threats whispered in the dark, mentions of Eleanor, how she had become the only soul she trusted. And then, on the last pages, a revelation that made Jonathan's blood run cold. A child, not Jonathan, another, conceived in violence. A child his mother believed Edward intended to erase before he ever drew breath. Jonathan's hands trembled. This can't be real. Eleanor lowered her head. Your mother told me everything. She begged me to protect her words. She said you must know, not to punish your father, but to understand him. Jonathan stared at the journal, horror and clarity twisting through him like twin blades. If this becomes known, our family name, everything, would collapse. Eleanor's voice cracked. Some things should collapse. Jonathan looked at her then, really looked, not as a servant, not as a girl whispered about in fear, but as the only person brave enough to hold the truth when everyone else chose silence. Eleanor, he whispered, I won't let him hurt you, or anyone else. A voice answered from behind them. I think it's far too late for that. They froze. Edward Hale stepped into the broken room, lantern in hand, his face carved in stone. Jonathan stood quickly, placing himself between Eleanor and his father. You knew, he said, his voice quivering with rage. You knew she wrote this. Edward's eyes narrowed. I knew she wrote lies. Hysteria. Poison meant to ruin me. Jonathan held up the journal. These are her words. And you, Edward said, taking a slow step forward, are my son. You will burn them. Jonathan didn't move. Eleanor's breath trembled behind him. Edward's jaw tightened. If you protect that girl, you're choosing her over your own blood. Jonathan lifted the journal to his chest. I'm choosing the truth. Edward lunged, but the lantern light flickered, wavered, then extinguished as if swallowed by the house itself. A breath of cold air swept through the collapsed room. Edward stopped mid-step, and in the dimness, lingering between the broken beams and the rising dawn, something shifted in the air, a presence that neither Jonathan nor Eleanor dared to name, because the house had remembered too, and it was not finished. If this story held your attention until the very last moment, tell me in the comments what you think truly happened inside that house, or what secrets might still be hiding in its walls. Make sure to subscribe to the channel for more dark, emotional stories from America's forgotten past. Share this video with someone who loves intense historical narratives, and don't forget to leave a like. It helps us bring even more gripping tales to life.